We continue now at the top of Daf Peiches Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 88a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked whether Avir Mizbeach, whether the airspace of the Mizbeach is like the Mizbeach or not like the Mizbeach. And on the previous summit, the Gemara tried to prove from Ola Sa'of, from a bird carbanola, that Avir Mizbeach is lav k'Mizbeach, that the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach. And Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said in the previous summit that that was not a proof, but Rav Shimi Bar Ashi says that he can actually prove from a bird offering the opposite, that the Avir Mizbeach is k'Mizbeach, because if it should enter your mind that it's not like the Mizbeach, so then Chata Sa'of Psula, when it comes to a Chata Sa'of that is disqualified, Hechi Maza Midama, how can he sprinkle from its blood? Havale Yerud, again, if the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach, it will be as if it descended from the Mizbeach. And Sha'ar Psula, when it comes to other disqualified offerings as well, Hechi Zorak Lu Midama, how is he able to sprinkle from the blood? And Rashi explains, Chata Sa'of Psula, when it comes to Chata Sa'of that is disqualified, Shemolka Barosh HaMizbeach Shalo Lishma, let's say you have a Chata Sa'of, where the Malika was done, the pinching of the neck was done at the top of the Mizbeach Shalo Lishma, not for its sake, Upasalan, it was disqualified. Diafagav the Nazis Lamatan Ha'amar Mar La'el, Molka B'chol Makom Mizbeach Kshera, even though that's really supposed to be done, meaning the Malika is supposed to be done below, not on the Mizbeach, but the Master said earlier that anywhere where the Malika is done, if it's done on the Mizbeach, it is kosher. V'lo Pasal Mala Dide'el B'Hazah, and we're only going to say that if it's done above, it's only a problem by the sprinkling. V'hecha demolka b'psul b'rosh ha-mizbeach. So therefore, let's say the malika was done in a disqualified manner at the top of the mizbeach. V'kaim olon b'chol hapsulin, and we've established by all disqualified situations imolu lo yirdu, once they ascend the mizbeach, they don't come down. So hechi shari le'mar lahazos midama. So how did the Master allow the sprinkling of that blood? Hare magbia umatas, you have to lift it up in order to sprinkle kisha'oches ba. You lift it up umaza, and then you sprinkle v'havale yerud. And so then, if the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach, it's going to be as if it descended from the Mizbeach. And Sha'ar Psulim, by other disqualified domim b'behemol Rebbe Gamliel, by other disqualified bloods of an animal, according to Rebbe Gamliel, Diamar b'mas nisin, who says in the Mishnah, Hadam pasol sha'ala lo yered, the same basic idea, that blood that's disqualified that goes up on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down. But again, hechi zarach midam, and how is he able to do this zrika from the blood? Hare zrika meirachagu, the zrika is done from a distance. Zorek, that's where he does the zrika. V'havale aver hamizbeach, isn't that the aver hamizbeach? Isn't that the airspace of the mizbeach? And it ends up being the same problem. And the Gemara continues and answers, even if one were to hold that Avra Mizbeach, that the airspace of the Mizbeach is not like the Mizbeach, but it is possible to do this Rika Demagalhu, you can just touch the animal directly to the Mizbeach and don't have it in the airspace of the Mizbeach, have it touched directly to the Mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Umashani Demagalu Lakosal Mizbeach, he touches it to the wall of the Mizbeach. Keshamaza Bechata Sof, when he sprinkles by the Chata Sof, V'chein Bezrikas Dam Pasal, and the same thing when he throws the blood that's disqualified, that's what he will do, he'll touch it to the Mizbeach. But the Gemara says, is that even possible? Ha Hazohi, is that called sprinkling? Mitzohi, that's called squeezing. And Hazarika, is that called, again, throwing the blood? Shvichahi, that's called pouring the blood, so that cannot be a good solution. V'yod, and further, Derech Hazah Bekach, Derech Zrika Bekach, is that the way of sprinkling? Is that the way of throwing? Rashi explains, Uparchina, the Gemara then asks, Ha Hazohi Bitmi, is that called sprinkling? Mitzohi, that's called squeezing. Ulinyan Domim Sulim Nami, and by the animal blood that's disqualified as well, Imagalahu, if he's going to touch directly to the Mizbeach, Shvicha Have, so that would be considered pouring. Velo Zrika, that's not considered throwing. V'yod, and further, V'chiderech Hazo Zrika Bekach, is that the normal way to sprinkle and throw? Elalav Mishum Da'avr Mizbeach Mizbeach Dami, rather must it be that this shows that the airspace of the Mizbeach is in fact considered like the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues and says, Amar Ravashi says, Idinakat lehu barosh ha-mizbeach, if he was holding it at the top of the Mizbeach, meaning if the Kohen is standing on the Mizbeach, and whatever it is in the airspace of the Mizbeach, hachinami, indeed, that certainly would be considered the Mizbeach. That actually was not even the question. It's 100% true that Avir Mizbeach is considered like the Mizbeach if the Kohen is on the Mizbeach. But Ki Ko Amar, but when did we say this? When did we ask the question? The Tolinu Bekanyamai. The question was, let's say the Kohen is on the floor, he's on the floor of the Azara, and he's suspending something in the airspace of the Mizbeach with a pole. That was the question, and Teiko, and the Gemara says to that question is left as a question. Rashi explains, Amar Ravashi says, Liolam Bayon Meholo Tifshi, you can't answer our question from here. To Hagavra Barosh HaMizbeach Koi, because in the case we're bringing right now, the person is standing standing on the Mizbeach. V'nakid lu, he's holding them over there. V'chi gavna lo mi boilan, in such a case that was never a question. Bi'avr Mizbeach le'el, in terms of the airspace of the Mizbeach, that was not a question. Hanochas gufa barosh ha-Mizbeach ka'hanochas karban dami, when his body, so to speak, when the person is on top of the Mizbeach, that's like the carbon is resting on the Mizbeach. That was never the question. V'chi kami boilan, and what was the question? Kagon dekoy a'ara, that's if the person, the individual, is on the ground. V'tolinu bekanya ba'avra Mizbeach, and he suspends it with a pole in the airspace of the Mizbeach. That was the question, and the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Klei halach, liquid vessels, mekachin es halach, they sanctify liquids. This is talking about the klei shores in the Beis HaMikdash. Umidos yavesh, and dry measures, mekachos es hayavesh, they sanctify that which is dry. Ein klei halach mekadeshes es hayavesh, a liquid vessel is not going to sanctify something dry. Velo yavesh, mekadesh es halach, and something dry is not going to sanctify a liquid. Klei hakodesh shenikvu, if you have klei hakodesh, if you have holy vessels that have a hole in them, im osen bohen me'ein malachtan shayu osen, if they do a similar work of the kind of work that they did, they're still able to function, it means, in the same manner. Ve'ein shalemim, and they are whole, mekachin, then they do sanctify. V'im lavin, if not, ein mekachin, they do not sanctify. V'chulan ein mekachin ela bekodesh, and in all of these cases, they only sanctify when they are in the kodesh. And Rashi explains, klei halach means ka'aros, umizrakos ladam, u'liyayin, u'lishemen. It means bowls and containers that are for blood, or for wine, or for oil. Midos hayavesh, dry measures. Shtei midos shal yavesh hayu sham. There were two different dry measures. Isaron v'chatzi isaron. One was the isaron and one was the chatzi isaron. Isaron lemedidas kol haminachas. The isaron was used for measuring carbon mincha. V'chatzi isaron lechatzos bo minchas chavise kohen gadol. And the chatzi isaron, that was in order to divide the minchas chavise kohen gadol, which was machatzisa baboker. Half of it was in the morning, u'machatzisa bo'erev, and half of it was at night. Now the reason why it says over here the word midos by dry, it doesn't say dry vessels, it says dry measures. She'ein kelim yuchadim liyavish, they weren't designated vessels for dry, elo except for these. Techlisha nosnin bo mincha klilachu, because the vessel which they put the mincha in was actually a klilach. Shemizrakus ka'aros ru'yan lakach, because the bowls and the basins, they were fit for that. So that which they actually put in, the mincha, was actually a klilach. Vein klilach mekachos as hayavish, the liquid vessels do not sanctify that which is dry. B'gemar metargim lo amidos halach. In the Gemara, they're going to say that this is actually talking about the midos halach, which is the measures of the liquid. It's not talking about the klilach, as Rashi just said above. You did have a situation where you would have the kli, which the mincha was put in. That was a vessel, that was lach, that was a liquid, that was a vessel for liquids. Shahayu osin vehein shleimim. Rashi explains that this means, again, they have to, if they have that hole in them, as long as they do the function which they used to do, and then it said v'hein shleimim, they are whole, and Rashi says kishahein shleimim. The way to read the Mishnah is when they are whole. In other words, what Rashi is saying is when it says, if you have a klei kodesh and nikvu, that the vessel has a hole in it, im osin bohen me'ein malachtan shahayu osin, if they do a similar function which they did, kishahein shleimim, when they were whole. It doesn't mean that they have to be whole, because it has a hole in it. But what it means is, again, when they were whole, when they were complete, they did this function, that's what they're doing now. And Rashi says, Ela Bakodesh, it said at the end of the Mishnah, that again, the Chulam Ein Mekach and Ela Bakodesh, that the Klei Shares, or the Klei Kodesh, they're only Mekadesh in the Kodesh, and that means Ba'azara, that means in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Lo Shanu Ela Midos, when we say that the Klei Halach, that they're not Mekadesh, the Yavish, they're not Mekadesh, that which is dry, that's only talking if it's measures for liquid. Avol Mizrakos, but when it comes to cups or buckets, Mekachin, those actually do sanctify. That's what Rashi just mentioned earlier. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Shneim Mileim Solas, that they're both filled with fine flour. And Rashi explains, Lo Shanu de'ein klei halach mekachin es hayavish. When we say that the vessels for liquid, they are not mekadesh dry, that's elamidos. That's only if it's measures, meaning zayin midos halach. There were 7 measures, liquid measures, shayu sham, which were there, and they are hin, v'chatzi hin, v'shlisha hin, v'chulu. They were the hin and the half hin and the third of the hin, etc. V'chevan dehanach lo chazu liyavish lamidi limdot, since they can't be used for measuring dry at all. V'hein lo nimshachu ela lemedida, and they were only anointed for the purpose of measuring. Lefigach ein mekachin el al yedei medida. That's why they only sanctify through measuring. Aval mizrakos, but when it comes to the cups or the buckets, afagav dechlei halachaninu, even though these are really liquid type of vessels, mekachin yavish, but when dry things are put in, they do sanctify. Dechihechi dechazu lalach chazu lesolas shu yavish. Just like they are fit for liquid, so too they are fit for fine flour, which is dry. And the Gemara continues, Amalei Ravacha mi Difti l'Ravina. Ravacha from Difti said to Ravina, Mincha, when we're talking about a carbon mincha, lachahi, isn't that actually liquid? And therefore you can't bring a proof from that. Rashi says, lachahi, Dahaksiv belula bashemen, meaning it's mixed with oil. That's what's written in the pasuk. So there's oil involved. So how can you learn from this pasuk about solas that we say that it's mekadesh, something that's yavish? That's not a good proof, because this item is not really yavish. Shneim milayim solas. It's not really yavish because there is oil there. And the Gemara continues. Amar Lei said back to him, Lo nitzracha elo liyavish abad. It is necessary. It's only necessary for the dry within it. It is true that there is oil, but there's also areas where the oil doesn't touch, where it is dry, and so therefore you see that the dry is sanctified as well. If you want, we could say that mincha lagabe dam ki yavish dami, that if you're comparing mincha relative to blood, because they're really primarily used for blood, and so relative to the blood, the mincha actually is considered yavish, even though there is oil, but again, when compared to the blood, it is considered to be yavish. Rashi explains, li yavish shabah, for that which is dry within it, she actually volel kuli, you're obviously not mixing the oil into all of it. Shalo yuba kartan shal yavish, there won't be a little bit that's dry, shalo naga bahen hashemin, which the oil didn't touch, v'kat shenu mizrakos, and that is sanctified again by these bowls, by these buckets, ki yavish dami. And then the other answer of the Gemara is that it's considered dry relative to the blood, v'shaper tifshot minoli yavish gomer. You could learn from there to something that is completely dry. And the Gemara continues, Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says, Klei Shares ein mekachin ela shleimin. Klei Shares of the Beis HaMikdash, they only sanctify if they are whole. Presumably Shmuel means if they are whole, meaning they can still do the same function like we explained in the Mishnah. Ein mekachin ela melein, they only sanctify if they are full. Ein mekachin ela mitochan, and they only sanctify from within. V'amri lo, and some have the version, Ein mekachin ela shleimin, they only sanctify when they are whole. Umeleim, again in full. Umi bifnim, and inside. Rashi is going to say that this means inside the Azara. And the Gemara says, "My beinayu." What's the difference between the two versions? Ika beinayu beirutse midos. The difference between them is, let's say you have overflowing measures. And the Gemara continues, "B'masnisa tana." And the Brisa was taught, "Ein mekachin ela shleimin umeleim umitochon ubifnim." That they only sanctify if they are whole and they are full, and from within and inside. And Rashi explains, "Ela shleimin." Again, it has to be whole. La'afuke nikvo. Again, that excludes if they have a hole in them. Again, presumably, if the hole is small enough that it still has the same function, that would be fine. Ve'in mekachin ela melein, and they only sanctify if they are full. Kilomar means to say sheyehei bohen shir shalem hatzarich ledavar. It means to say it has to have the full measure that is needed for whatever is being taken care of. Im yaveshu, for example, if it's dry, sheyasham isaron shalem lemincha, there should be a full isaron for a mincha. V'minchas nesachim hi, if it's a minchas nesachim shenitna bekli, which is in a vessel, yehesham gimel esronim lapar ushnei esronim laoil. It should be 3 esronim for a bull, 2 esronim for a ram. Avalin chaser hashir, but if it's missing the proper amount, ein hakli mekach, and then the vessel does not sanctify them. She'eno roy lekli, because it's not fit for the vessel. Kach shamati b'menachos. That's what I heard in menachos. Ela bifnim, it has to be inside. Ba'azara, Rashi learns that inside over here means in the azara. And beirutze midos ika beinayu. The difference is if you have heaps, if it's overflowing. Laman detani ein mekach and ela mitochan. The one that learns the version that says it only sanctifies from within the vessel. Kasavar beirutze midos lo neskachu. So if you have a heap, if it's essentially a little overflowing the vessel, that's not going to be sanctified. The only thing that's sanctified is that which is in the actual vessel itself. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu ela shein daito lahosif. When we say that if it's not the full measure, it's not sanctified, that's only if the individual doesn't have intention to add on and to make it the full amount. won't. Avol daito lahosa, but if the intention is to add on and to make it the proper measure, so then rishon kodesh, then as it goes in little by little, it is all going to be sanctified. Tanya nami hachi, we have a brisa like this as well. Malayan, it says that they have to be full. Ein malayan ela shleiman. Malayan means that it has to be whole. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Amosai, when is that true? Bisman shein daito lahosa. If he doesn't have in mind to add on, avol daito lahosa, but if he has in mind to add on rishon kodesh, then it is sanctified rishon as it goes in one by one, so to speak. And Rashi explains, Lo shanu hada amrinan dein mekachin ela malayim, means that which we say that it only sanctifies if it's full. Ela shein daito lahashlam lahosa vad kashir. That's only if he doesn't have intention to add on and to complete the proper amount. Tanya nami hachi, we have a brisa like this as well. Malayim, it says malayim. Rashi says this is a reference to shenehem malayim solas. It says that they're both filled with solas. Ela shleimim means whole. Shahayu esronim velugin shleimim lafuke shir chaser. That means that it has to be the full measure. It shouldn't be a measure that is missing. The lo mekachi, in such a situation, it is not going to be sanctified. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ein klei halach mekadesh, if you have liquid vessels, they're not going to sanctify that which is dry. Amar Ravi Tamer Ravasi, Rav says, and some say Ravasi says, Ein mekachin likarv, when we say it's not going to sanctify, that means it's not going to sanctify in order to allow it to be offered. Avol mekachin lipasel, however, it is going to sanctify in terms of possible disqualification. And Rashi explains, Avol mekachin klei halachas hayavish lipasel, let's say you have a liquid vessel, it does sanctify that which is dry for disqualification purposes, meaning Shem Yotza Chutz LaKloim, at that point in time now, if it leaves the curtains of the Azara, or Nagal Bo Tzvul Yom, or let's say it's touched by a Tzvul Yom, and so there's an issue of Tumah, Nifsal, it will become disqualified. Diahani Le Kli Lahachshiro Lipasel, because the Kli is going to be effective in order to prepare it Lipasel for disqualification. Kedetani, as we learned in a Braisa, HaMenochos Moalin Bohen Mishahuktashu, Kidsho Bekli Huchshru Lipasel. It says that once they're sanctified in the vessel, they are prepared for disqualification. B'tvul yom of a mechusar kippurim, by a tvul yom or a mechusar kippurim. A tvul yom is tamei because though he has immersed that day, he hasn't waited until the end of the day. Mechusar kippurim, the individual has not brought his atonement, his korban, and therefore he's not totally pure. And the Gemara continues, Zika Damasni Lo'aha, there are those who learn the statement of Rav or Ravasi, that's the statement of Ein Mekachin Li Karev Avol Mekachin Li Pasil, they learn that statement on the following halacha. It says, Ein Mevi'in Menachos U'Nesachim U'Minchas Behemo V'Ikurim Min HaMeduma, one cannot bring a carbon mincha or Nesachim or Minchas Behemo or Bikurim from Meduma, which is that which is mixed with Truma. V'Ein Sarach Lomar Me Orla V'Kilei HaKerim, you certainly cannot bring those from Orla or from Kilei HaKerim. V'Im Hevi Lo Kiddush, and if he does bring it, so then it is not going to be sanctified. That is not going to be sanctified in the vessel as a carbon mincha, etc. And on that we have the statement, Amar Ravi, Tamer Ravasi, Rav says, and some say Ravasi says, Lo Kiddush Li Karev, when we say it's not going to be sanctified, we mean it's not going to be sanctified in order to be able to be offered. Avol Kodesh Li Pasal, however, it is going to be sanctified in order to be disqualified. And Rashi explains, Menachos U'Nesachim U'Minchas Behema Min HaMeduma, you can't bring it from Meduma, V'Afal Pisha Mutar LaKohanim, even though Meduma is technically permitted for Kohanim, because it's just mixed with Truma, and Truma is permitted to Kohanim, but still it's problematic for Minchas and for Mincha and Nesachim, etc. Deva'inon Mutar L'Chol Yisrael, because the food you have to bring it from has to be mutter to everybody. Shenamar, as it says, Mimashke Yisrael Min HaMutar L'Yisrael, we learned that from the Pasuk. V'Ein Tzarech Lomar Me Orla, and we don't even need to say that it can't be from Orla, Shasur Afla Kohanim, that's totally prohibited even to Kohanim. And then the statement is, it is going to be sanctified, it is going to be considered Kodesh, Lipasil, in order to be disqualified. Delo Nafki Lochol V'Yisrafu Shekitshem Hakli. It's not going to be considered to be Chulin, it's not going to be considered to be completely mundane, because it was sanctified in the vessel. And Rashi continues and notes, V'Hadar Ravasi, now this statement of Ravasi, again, that it's sanctified for disqualification purposes, Lo Mahadra Bikurim, that's actually not going on Bikurim. Ela Amenochos, it's only going on Menochos. We're saying that the Mincha is sanctified for disqualification purposes. The Bikurim lav Kedushas Klihu, because Bikurim is not sanctified by the vessel. Umayli Pasalika, and what concept of disqualification is there? Umayli Korevik, and what concept of offering is there? Halo Karvu, Bikurim is not something that is offered. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Klei Kodesh, when it comes to holy vessels, Shenikvu, if they have a hole in them, Ein Matichin Osan, you can't melt them down to fix them, Vein Matichin L'Sochan Aver, you can't melt lead into there to fix it, and Nifkamu, if it's damaged, Ein Mesakhin Osan, you don't fix them, Sakin Shenifkam, if you have a knife that's damaged, Ein Mashchizin Es Pigimasa, you don't fix that area where it's damaged, and Nishmito, let's say the handle comes off, Ein Machzir Nosa, you don't return it. Abashol Omer, Abashol says, Sakin Mitarefes Haisa B'Mikdash, there was a knife that was not a good knife, it would cause treifa, it would cause disqualification, and it was in the Mikdash. V'nimnu ala Kohanim v'ganzu, and the Kohanim, they voted about it, and they stored it away, they hid it away. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Bigdei Kahuna, the garments of Kahuna, Ein Osan Osam Masei Machat, you don't make them with needlework, with stitching, Ela Masei Oreg, rather they're made by weaving. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Masei Oreg, it says it has to be woven. Nisgualu, let's say they become soiled, Ein Mechabsin Lo Beneser V'Lo Ba'al, you're not going to wash them, you cannot wash them with natron or with soap. And the Gemara says, Habemayim mechavsin, but that implies that you are allowed to wash them with water. Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Hachi Kamar, this is what we actually mean to say. Hugu b'mayim, let's say it gets soiled, but it is at the level where it could be washed with water, so then it's not so dirty. Mechavsin oso b'neserval, so then you are able to wash it with natron and with soap. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Peiches Amid Beis.